Sign up to The Economist for in-depth curated expert analysis of world events and topics ranging from business and culture to science and technology. You'll get the weekly digital edition, online-only articles, curated newsletters on politics, the markets, science, culture, and China, and full access to The Economist Podcast Plus. The Economist is independent journalism for independent thinking. Go to economist.com and get your first month free.
Yo, before we get into the episode, please do me a huge favor and take a second to fill out our listener survey. We want to know who's listening to the podcast and how we can better serve y'all. It'll take you like 7 minutes and you could be entered to win a $250 Visa gift card. Even if you took it last year, please go ahead and take it again at citycast.fm/survey. And if that's not enough of an incentive, it's kind of got real, y'all. The homies over at CityCast Salt Lake have been telling all their listeners that they got the most responses last year. And if you know anything about me, I'm always down to compete. And for some reason, I want to whoop their ass now. So please take our survey at citycast.fm/survey and make sure you let them know you be listening to CityCast Chicago. All right, I appreciate it. Today on CityCast Chicago, Chicago has an affordable housing crisis. Meanwhile, the Chicago Housing Authority, the second largest public housing authority in the nation and the largest owner of rental housing in Chicago, is sitting on hundreds of acres of vacant land, decaying and abandoned properties. And according to them, there are currently over 120,000 Chicagoans on their waiting list. According to some activists, that number could be as high as 200,000. So we look at two properties that exemplify some of the worst problems at CHA and check in on how leaders are responding. It's Tuesday, May 28th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Rachel Hinton, Mick Dumke, investigative reporters for Block Club Chicago. Welcome back to CityCast Chicago, y'all.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Rachel, I want to start with a kind of simple overview question. Can you remind listeners what are the roles and responsibilities of the CHA? Because I know they're not the only body responsible for helping tackle Chicago's affordable housing crisis, from City Hall to the Department of Housing. They play a specific role. Can you remind us what that is?
Yeah, it's really to help people who need assistance getting housing. So helping people who are low income get into housing, building public housing, up until a certain point, like managing that housing. So that includes like vouchers, other programs like the Scattered Site program, and others like that, all under the kind of umbrella of public housing.
At this point in time, the CHA doesn't really manage properties directly. It's a property owner, one of the largest in the city, and certainly one of the largest of affordable housing in the city. But over the last 20 years or so, it has basically outsourced the management to private companies it hires to do that work for it. And those are the properties the CHA actually owns. As Rachel mentioned, the CHA also issues thousands of vouchers, which are essentially like coupons to help people acquire and pay for housing in the private marketplace. It's really work to get out of the direct management business almost altogether at this point in time.
When CHA decided to tear down public housing, it often sent a signal across the country that other cities started tearing down in the same ways. And now we're at a point in which those public high rises are gone. People have been spread across the city. The wait list has grown. And you two have done a great job of really honing in on particular properties, addresses that really sort of exemplify these larger crises. And I wanted to sort of dig in on some of those in particular. You all mentioned a historic home out in Pullman on the 105th block of South Corliss. Rachel, can you tell me about this historic row house and its CHA story?
Yeah, so it was built back in the 1800s, late 1800s, as part of the Pullman Company Town The Pullman Company built sleeper railroad cars, and the home was one of many that workers who worked at the Pullman Company would come back to at the end of the day. And then as they moved up in the company, basically their housing became better as well. So this row home, I want to say, was kind of the middle point for people who worked at the Pullman Company. And I want to say the CHA acquired the home back in the 80s as part of its scattered site program, which was the point of it, or the goal of it, was to desegregate public housing. So instead of stacking people into high rises and keeping them in certain areas, we're going to try to disperse, scatter where people live.
Are those sites sort of equitably distributed around the city?
I don't know about equitably, but they are around the city.
I think what we found, Jacoby, was we were looking at this, is that the intentions were, because large developments like Cabrini Green or the Robert Taylor homes were concentrated in Black neighborhoods, and as you mentioned, were deliberately segregated away from other neighborhoods. The scattered site program was an attempt to address that in a small way. But because of restrictions, both political resistance from like members of the city council and from communities, as well as cost restrictions, because the federal government only allocated so much money to the CHA, they ended up actually putting a lot of scattered sites in what were predominantly Hispanic areas. Those were the places where they were not hyper concentrated, hyper segregated Black neighborhoods, but they were also deemed to be affordable. Was it better than the stacked up developments? Yes, there are scattered sites in a lot of different neighborhoods around the city, but if you actually look at the unit counts, they tend to still be clustered in certain areas.
Yeah, this Pullman home is really part of the history of the area. And the story I did looked at the home, which has sat vacant, I want to say, since 2005, 2006, how bringing it back online could potentially be helpful, to potentially bringing development, bringing more families to the community, and also CHA's plans for it. It was initially part of this, or slated to be part of the Restore Home initiative, which is their plan to rehab and potentially sell off some public housing units to public housing residents. But then as I continued reporting the story, they said, well, we're not sure if that's going to happen with this home, in part because the cost for rehabbing it is going to be so high. A needs assessment that we got showed that could be around $500,000.
I mean, that's what happens when you leave a property sitting there for 25 years for the elements to just tear at it.
Yeah. And so asking people about that potential plan, CHA now says we're pursuing alternative plans that could include tearing it down, that could include something else. People were really bad about that.
Yeah. Because it's a negligent cycle that is sort of Tracy Scott, the current CEO of CHA, like so many before her, is able to sit there and say things like, this is, it's not my fault. Like, essentially, this is a problem that predates me, which we understand. But when we look at the institution and its inability to sort of quickly work to restore some of these homes, now you have a CEO who can say well, that will cost a lot of money. That'll cost a lot of rehab, but they're not taking accountability, it seems, for why these things got here.
Tracy Scott has said in editorials recently before the city council's housing and real estate committee, that the CHA needs more federal funds. They need more money to be able to build that public housing, to build affordable housing, to get families into homes. Publicly, they say we need to revamp, we need to restore, rehabilitate some of our housing. Our housing stock is older, it's deteriorating. We need to get some of those homes back online.
They've struggled to deliver on their promises. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
And also, when we've seen this playbook before, this isn't worth developing, we tear it down, but then nothing replaces it, because that process is sort of also expensive. And so it feels like this particular property sort of represents that negligent cycle, but also an institution's ability to outlive sort of responsibility and accountability in some ways.
I think that's right on the money. The same justification was given on a much larger scale when the plan for transformation was launched 25 years ago and the high rises started to come down. I'm certainly not sitting here defending the condition that those properties were in by the end.
But they were led to get there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So residents, even at the time, felt that the CHA had let them deteriorate, willfully or through terrible management or through funding shortfalls. And then it became a self-perpetuating cycle, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, you mentioned that right now they sort of say there may be alternative plans, but I mean, could that ultimately look like this house sitting for more years, just sort of on this block, again, sort of continually representing this cycle?
So when I spoke to CHA, they said that, any plans that they pursue, they hope, or they plan to be part of their Restore Home timeline, which is mid-2025. So, I mean, at least another year of this home sitting vacant. And then, figuring that out of are we going to demolish it? I imagine since it is part of a historic landmark area, they're going to have to go through some sort of process to get approval for that. So that's going to take some time as well. So yeah, I imagine it's still going to sit empty for at least another year, 2 years, 3 years.
At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI? It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
Let's go from Pullman to Humboldt Park. Mick, you looked at a home at 849 North St. Louis. What is its story?
This was another house that the CHA acquired as part of its scattered site program in the early 80s. People have lived in it, but we found it's been vacant for at least 7.5 years. Some neighbors think that it's been far longer than that. What really jumps out at this property, though, is that not only has it deteriorated physically like the Pullman property has while it's been sitting empty, but it's become kind of a staging area for various other social and economic problems in the neighborhood. It's no secret West Humboldt Park for a long time has been, there's been a very active drug trade there, very open and active drug trade. A number of years ago, I spent a lot of time out there and concluded the illegal drug market was probably one of the biggest employers out on the west side generally, and including in West Humboldt Park. So what's happened just even in the last few months since we've been looking at this is that there was always some activity around this vacant CHA house. But then a few months ago, it looks like one of the local drug businesses basically moved there and started using it as a staging area. So it started with the backyard, which was not fully fenced off, and then slowly people moved to the front yard, and then it became a daily occurrence. So by this winter and this spring, residents were telling me, and then I saw it myself when I went out there to go reporting, it was just a very obvious open air drug market. In order to even drive up the block, usually you had to stop and wait for the drive-through transactions to complete because there's somebody in the cars ahead of you, pause, making an exchange through the window and stuff. I don't expect the CHA to be responsible for our drug problems in this country and our economic problems and the disinvestment that is tied in with all this. But they had not, at least up until the time that I was reporting on this, they had not properly secured this property. And Jacoby, the story really ended up becoming an example of city government, city agencies and city departments really passing the buck. So neighbors would call and ask for help. They'd call the CHA. The CHA says, well, if there's illegal activity there, you need to call the police. They'd call the police. The police would say, well, it's a CHA property. There's only so much we can do. They call streets and sanitation. They'd come pick up the trash, but then the drug traffic would return. So it just became this crazy cycle that the neighbors were having to deal with every single day.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of tie it in also with sort of what we were talking about earlier, they did an assessment on sort of what it would cost to fix this home up. I think it was north of $200,000. I mean, do we have a sense of how many of these scattered sites are sitting in this level of disrepair where hundreds of thousands of dollars would be needed, but also seems like, I guess what I'm asking, like, what do we think that threshold is where CHA is just like, this is not worth saving, and thus we're now in that, I guess we need an alternative plan, so we're going to sit on it for even longer?
I'm not sure we've gotten a clear answer on that. And while we don't know exactly how many units are at this level of disrepair, we do know there are almost 500 empty units in the scattered site program alone. That doesn't include other CHA properties. I mean, there's dozens of empty units in the Cabrini Green row houses. There's dozens of empty units at the Lathrop homes. And we could go on and on and on. So just as a little snapshot, we just looked at two of them, and one of them was almost $500,000 to rehab. The other one was almost, more than $200,000. So you're right. That's going to add up really fast.
Yeah. Recently, you both reported on CHA CEO being, in some ways, at least brought in front of city council to discuss some of these problems. The hearing was partly in response to an investigation that Block Club did with the Illinois Answers Project. Rachel, how did that hearing go?
Tracy Scott walked through CHA's, Restore Home initiative. She took questions from older people. I would say really the main takeaway for me was that was the public comment period. A lot of residents coming up and talking about look, we need something better than this. This is not working, both in terms of how the housing is built, how it's maintained, but also CHA leadership. Allegedly, this is the first of two meetings that'll happen this year, but I don't know that we got anything substantive from this meeting. I don't know that we got substantive answers, but that we got a clear plan for what CHA is going to do to kind of address some of the challenges you asked about earlier beyond, we hear you and we're going to do Restore Home. I feel like it was maybe a little lacking.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you pointing to the public comment section, because I think residents, Chicagoans, have been fighting every single day for years, demanding whether it's new leadership, whether it's more investment, whether it's cleaning up vacant lots or cleaning up decaying properties. Mick, when you sit down and talk with residents, what are they asking for from CHA in this time?
Well, they're asking for really the same things that most of us expect out of places we live, which is a clean, safe place to live and responsiveness when something happens with with the property. You would like to be able to call your landlord or your property manager and get a response. One thing that really jumped out at us when we were listening to the public testimony last week was there were a lot of different concerns and complaints about different properties. But what was very consistent was residents saying over and over again, hey, Tracy Scott, we never see you. Where are you? You don't understand how we live because you're never here. And I thought that was actually, of everything that was said, I thought it was the most consistent and the most damning set of comments. And let's be really fair real quick. I think we should say that the CHA has a tough job. It's not politically popular all the time to provide housing to people who need housing. Just even saying public housing, it has this, negative connotation to it. And there are thousands of units around the city. They're trying to help a lot of people with different circumstances. So we get it that they have a tough job and they do help a lot of people. So let's acknowledge that. But the fact that so many residents from so many different places have these consistent sets of concerns, both at this most recent hearing and through the years, says something.
And not just yes, residents, neighbors of scattered site buildings or buildings that were supposed to be part of this, supposed to be inhabited. But Francine Washington, who's on the board of commissioners of the CHA, also spoke up. She's a longtime CHA resident. And she said, we don't see you, Tracy Scott, and it's time for you to go. So I think I'm really interested to see, like, does that change? There was a board meeting and Tracy Scott was there. I believe she's at most board meetings, but what's going on beyond, the times when she has to publicly appear? Is she choosing to meet with residents? We did hear at that committee meeting, from some older people that, they brought up concerns and then she immediately went to go see the home or go see the unit where, maybe someone was having sewage problems or other plumbing issues. But beyond, us doing this story and a committee hearing coming up, like, what else is being done to engage with the people you are trying to house? And I echo what Mick said in terms of, like, this is a tough job. I also think that people are probably a little tired of hearing, like, look, I've only been here 4 years. This isn't my fault. We get that. I think a lot of people understand that, but I think people want a substantive plan, and not just a plan. They want to see, like, that plan put in action.
And so Brandon Johnson and the mayor's office, they also play a part in this. What is the city saying right now?
Yeah, I don't know that we've gotten a straight answer from the mayor's office on that. Kind of similar to the CTA, the issue of leadership there. The mayor doesn't discuss personnel matters in the media. Makes sense on some level, but I think that at a certain point, both of these agencies, there's a big call for a change in leadership at the top.
And as it relates to the CHA, just so everybody understands, the CHA is technically a separate, independent governmental entity. It's not a city department. The city also has a Department of Housing. Now, the mayor has extraordinary control over the CHA because he or she appoints the CEO and the people on the board. So effectively, like, can, send it in another direction if he wanted to. But so far, we haven't heard much from the mayor in relationship to the CHA. We haven't heard him talking about it really at all.
Mick, when Tracy sat in front of city council, she also touted that, about 1,000 units had recently been built and that there were still plans to build more. Do we have a sense of at least how CHA is currently delivering on their Restore Home initiative?
Well, we don't have much of a sense about Restore Home specifically because Restore Home actually targets scattered sites and small properties.
40 specific scattered site properties, as well as, like, a bunch of other ones that are in their, like, small to medium sized, like, housing. We know that they have completed a few, like, multifamily unit buildings, and others are close to completion. Some are in the design phase, which means that they're going to, like, potentially look at redesigning how they can rehab this home, potentially needing some, like, I believe, new construction. Restore Home, in other words, is important, but it doesn't apply to many of the CH's legacy properties, like on South State Street. Okay, so like the former Robert Taylor home site, most of which now has either been sold off to private interests or is empty without housing there. So you're right. Tracy Scott has said, we've got we've done some units, we've got more in the pipeline. Personally, I don't think it's a coincidence that they've been under fire for some of the things we've been talking about here, for their neglect of properties they own, for selling off land without building housing on it. And so over the last year or so, I believe they have started to step up their game. And that just means to me, we and everybody else in town need to continue to stay on them,
step up the pressure,
keep the spotlight on it, and hope that they continue to build housing, because that's what they're supposed to be doing.
I want to give another huge thank you to Rachel Hinton and Mick Dumke, investigative reporters for Block Club Chicago. You're always welcome here at CityCast, my friends.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kobe.
Before we let you go, remember, the CityCast Chicago ecosystem does not end with the podcast. Head over to our website, chicago.citycast.fm. While you're there, check out our neighborhood guides, our best of food and drink list, take our listener survey, and make sure you subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. And if you got a little more time, go on and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Now, of course, I got some good news for you. Peace Fest Inglewood returns this Saturday from 2 to 7 p.m. at the Peace Campus on 64th and Honoree. They're going to have a resource fair, giveaways, great music, and so much more. If you're interested, please register, or if you want to volunteer, check the link in our show notes. As always, I appreciate you for listening, making time for the podcast, reading the newsletter. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.